I started crocheting about a month ago. I was in desperate need of a hobby and I was hooked on all those cute crochet videos that popped up all over social media. It looked like a fun little way to distract yourself from what was going on around you. And truth be told, I really needed the distraction. I was starting to feel like a total zombie. All I ever did was eat, sleep and work. Well, I ate when I remembered to, and I slept whenever I was able to actually get any sleep in at all. I felt like I was beginning to go through the motions in my life. The only thing I really felt anymore was just stress. I was stressed out at work, but I was even more stressed out at home. See, I lived in a tiny apartment off the freeway. I had a lot to be stressed about in this apartment. It seemed like everything was broken all the time and my neighbours were always so rude. But the worst thing of all was the noise. This apartment seemed like the noisiest place on earth. Between the constant ear-piercing sounds of the freeway, the seemingly never-ending construction happening on the property, and the sounds of the police sirens always blaring down the roads, I thought I'd go deaf. It was hell. So, crocheting to me was a way to try and relieve that stress. And I mean, it did work to an extent. It was sort of calming. I liked feeling the soft yarn on my hands as I worked. I liked the constant repetitive motions of crocheting, and seeing the end results of my labour was so satisfying. On the other hand, I'd lose my mind anytime I missed a stitch, or read the pattern wrong, or got tangled up in a mess of yarn for the millionth time. Still, if anything was going to stress me out, it might as well be something I enjoyed getting stressed by. The last project I sought to crochet was a doll. I had seen tons of those cute little amigurumi doll tutorials all over the internet, and I wanted to see if I could do it. I wanted to get it done all in one sitting, but my work schedule was too chaotic for me to be able to do that. So I opted for making the doll piece by piece. First I crocheted the body and head. I messed up more than a few times, nearly fraying the yarn with how often I kept unravelling it to start over. When I finally got to do something that looked like a body, I realised just how wonky she actually looked. Her little pink body was all fuzzy and messy. There were a few stitches missing here and there, and she had one leg longer than the other. Still, I persisted. I gave her a head awkwardly misshaped and disformed, but a head nonetheless. I kept glancing over at the clock frantically. I had to get ready for work soon. But I really wanted to finish the face first before I went. I grabbed 2 little buttons for eyes and messily sewed them onto her head. I hadn't even realised I had grabbed 2 different sized buttons, nor did I even remember how to sew buttons onto a project in the first place. But I tried, and that was all that mattered. Then there she was. A tiny little lopsided doll with 2 button eyes placed unevenly. She was missing so much. She didn't have arms or a mouth or hair, but At this point, I had to go to work. I didn't want to get yelled at again, so I set her down on my desk and headed out. I was so distracted my entire shift. All I could think about was my doll. What kind of hair would I give her? What size yarn would I use? And what colour? Would I give her clothes? What kind of clothes would she wear? Did I have any yarn that complemented her pink skin? And what expression would she have on her cute little lopsided face? My entire day at work, all I could think about was how excited I was to go home and continue working on her. What I didn't predict was getting off work at 11:30 p.m. that night. I trudged up to my apartment door past midnight, groggy, exhausted, and fully drained. Cars were blaring their horns on the freeway. I saw my next door neighbour, a guy around my age, going into his apartment with another girl he had just been out with. This happened a few times a week, and I mentally reminded myself to blast a fan in my room to drown out the noises that would come from his bedroom. I stumbled into my apartment and was just hit with this wave of sadness. I'd been so excited to come home and crochet, and now I couldn't even keep my eyes open. When I went into my room, the doll was still there on my desk. I stared blankly at it. I felt so upset, then, all at once very determined. I had wanted to work on it that night, and that was exactly what I was going to do. At the very least, I'd finish her face and give her a mouth. That was easy enough. I just needed a needle and a thread, and then I could sleep. I mustered all of my energy and haphazardly sewed a little uneven smile across her face. I could have taken it out and tried again, but with how weird she'd been looking up to that point, I thought a little crooked smile suited her. It felt good to at least finish the face. The rest could come tomorrow. At least that's what I told myself. I put her up on my bookshelf and changed into my PJs, then fell onto my bed unceremoniously. Now, as exhausted as I was, it was hard to sleep. Let me tell you about trying to sleep in the noisiest hellhole on earth. It was near impossible, no matter how tired you were. The cars drove loudly across the freeway at all hours of the night. The next door neighbour's bed thumped against my wall, and someone was showering, so the faint hiss of the boiler rang throughout the complex. I also happened to live in a tiny corner of the apartment, where the wind funneled just right to whoosh constantly against my window, sounding like an animal hissing and moaning. Most nights I'd blast my fan for a little white noise to drown out the other noise, but it didn't really help that much. I lay there exhausted, both physically and mentally, and tried desperately to get the sounds out of my head. The hissing was loud, the thumping was erratic and jarring. Then something else, something new. Whispering. A voice. I could barely really put my finger on it. It was so soft and quiet. So quiet I was unsure if it was even a voice at all. But it didn't sound like one of the many noises of the apartment. It sounded very distinct. Any time I thought I'd hear it, it would just as soon stop. Any time I thought I could place where it was coming from, it sounded like it moved. It gave me goosebumps, but I was so sure it couldn't be a voice. I was just tired, that's what I told myself. I was exhausted. Eventually, with great difficulty, I basically forced my body to fall asleep despite the noise. It was a restless and uneasy sleep. It was the whispers that woke me up. It sounded like an unending stream of quiet, hushed words. It sounded like a jumbled, incoherent mess, but it was much louder than it had been when I'd fallen asleep. Too loud to sleep through now. I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes and straining to see anything that could be making that noise. It wasn't stopping. The whispers were growing persistent. Then, amidst the jumbled mess of whispers, I swore I heard something. Actual words. Her eyes. What was that? The whispers returned to what they were before. Just one incoherent, hushed voice persistently calling out. I closed my eyes and tried to hear again, to see if I could decipher any more words. My heart was the only thing I heard now, racing hectically. I was shaking. I didn't know what I was hearing. All the other noises I could attribute to something I knew, but this was new. Quickly I turned on the lights to my bedroom. I was alone, just as I had been when I got home and just as I had been when I fell asleep. There was nothing here. There was nothing that would be whispering. There was no one that could be whispering. My bedroom door was already locked and my blinds were shut tight. I tried to convince myself I was just hearing things. I really did. I was exhausted, I was stressed, and it was easy to imagine that my mind was playing tricks on me. But the whispers continued. Even with the lights on, they persisted. I hesitantly got comfortable in my bed again and tried to close my eyes, forcing sleep once again, hoping that maybe with the lights on I'd be less scared. It didn't work. My mind was focused on those whispers, and every so often I could swear that I heard actual words. Want her. I need her. My breathing was quick and laboured, and I strongly considered that I might be having a mental breakdown. I knew I was stressed, but I didn't realise it had gotten this bad. I was crying despite myself, and I tried to keep calm, but it was no use. Then I heard it. 5:13. Her eyes. 5:13. I had heard it very clearly. There was absolutely no way in hell I imagined that. And 513 was my apartment number. I spent that entire night frozen in fear. Honestly, I had no idea what else I was supposed to do. Was I supposed to call someone? Was I supposed to call Mum and tell her I've lost it? Was I supposed to call the police and report that I heard noises coming from nowhere? I sobbed silently into my pillow, trying not to let the whispers enter my head, but being unable to stop them. They effortlessly mixed in with the other apartment noises, with the funneled wind, with the freeway traffic, with the boiler hisses. They all played in my head, never-ending, maddening. I would have torn my own ears off to get some peace and quiet. The sun rose, but that didn't signal the new day for me. It was the start of the construction outside. The new set of deafening noises, the screeching of metal, the clanging of iron, the roar of the trucks. That was how I knew it was tomorrow. Maybe it was stupid of me, but I just tried to get on with my day. The whispers had gone quiet, much more so than they were the night before. Maybe it was because the construction was so loud, maybe it was because the voice ran out of things to say. Either way, I was grateful. Maybe if I went on about my day, like everything was fine, maybe it would be fine. Maybe I didn't lose my mind after all. I gathered up all my laundry because I couldn't really afford to let it sit another day, and I walked over to the shared laundry room for the complex. Thankfully I was alone, with only the sound of construction and washers and dryers running behind me. It was the closest thing I had gotten to quiet in about a week. My solitude was short-lived, however, as one of my neighbours came in with a load of his own laundry. I jumped at the sight of him. He was an older man. He lived in the apartment across from my own. We didn't have a good history. Let's just say he's the reason I don't wear shorts outside my apartment, out of uncomfort for the looks he gives me, and also out of fear of the yelling fit his wife got into when she first caught him, because clearly it was more of a problem that I wore them at all and less a problem that he stared at my ass. The second he walked in, the lingering stares began. The whole time I couldn't stop shaking. I hurriedly threw in a load of laundry, but didn't want to stick around to do another. I shuffled the rest of my clothes back into the hamper, all the while being painfully aware of his eyes burning into the back of my head. I couldn't help but think of the whispers last night. 5:13. I shook my head and tried to ignore it, but I was terrified. That and I'd gotten no sleep. It wasn't a good combination. I made a beeline for the door, staring down at my hamper and trying not to make eye contact with the man. I didn't even notice my next door neighbour open the laundry room door until my hamper made full contact with his stomach. Everything I had flew out of my hands onto the ground as I heard him grunt. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," I nearly screeched. I dropped to the floor and began to pick everything up. I could have just bent over to grab my clothes, but I didn't want to risk the older man looking at my ass again. My next door neighbour rubbed his stomach, then reached down and helped load some stuff into my hamper. He muttered something like "it's okay" and helped shift my hamper to the side so he could pass. Now thoroughly humiliated, I ran back to my apartment. I didn't know what to do at this point. I was shaking. Every little sound made me jump out of my skin. I considered calling Mum again, maybe just to casually talk to someone, but I knew for a fact I wouldn't be able to sound so casual. Then I saw her. My little doll sitting on my shelf, smiling at me with that little crooked grin. Maybe that would calm me down. Maybe I could relax and crochet. And it worked. It really did for a little while. I sat there on my bed, doll in hand, crocheting some hair onto her little wonky head. There were no whispers, just the familiar and annoying noises of construction in the complex. There were no voices, just my own thoughts. And it felt so good. It felt validating. Maybe I wasn't losing it after all. And it was so rewarding to see my little doll with a cute little mop of black yarn hair framing her sweet face. It seemed like my day would be fine. There were no other residents in the laundry room when I grabbed my clothes. That was a plus. It wasn't until I began to get ready for work that everything started again. I opened my closet and pulled out my uniform. And there it was again. Whispers. Louder, more persistent, more urgent. And definitely more coherent. Nothing jumbled, nothing undecipherable. I could understand everything. Gorgeous pink top. Oh God, her eyes. I stared down at my own body, at my grey sweatpants and my pink t-shirt. I really thought I was going to pass out at that moment. I started sweating and shaking so hard I was sure I'd vomit all over the place. I looked at the time. It was way too late to call off work. They'd never find a replacement in time. Swallowing all my fear, I messily dressed in my uniform and rushed out the front door. But work was no better. I was so distracted, so terrified. I jumped whenever someone called my name. I yelped whenever I heard a sudden sound. I sweat through my uniform and tripped more than once, being distracted by my surroundings. I got a huge lecture from my boss. He really tore into me. He glared down at me, pure anger in his eyes, and sent me home, telling me I'd better come back tomorrow actually ready to work. I'll admit it, I cried in front of him. It wasn't so much that I was sad I got sent away from work, more that I was scared to go back home. As I walked up to my front door, I couldn't help but notice the old man across the way. He was staring at me shamelessly through my window. His hands were fidgeting with something he was putting in the window. I didn't have a chance to see what it was. I quickly stumbled with my eyes and ran into the door. I didn't like him staring at me, and there it was. The second I walked into my apartment, the whispers continued. Her eyes. I refused to let this get to me. I had just been sent home from work. I was in trouble. I'd get written up again if something like this happened. I couldn't let this paranoia, this panic take over my life. I would continue like nothing was happening. I made myself a meal in the kitchen, ignoring the frantic voice. Her eyes. Her eyes. I want. No, I wouldn't pay attention. I ate my food, trying to focus on my phone while I did, and not the whisper invading my head. I went to my room where the voice grew louder. I tried to shake it off. The yarn still lay on my bed, and I figured I could give the doll an outfit. That would calm me down. That would relax me. I grabbed the doll off the shelf and the whispers stopped. Cautiously, I stared down at the little yarn figure in my hands. Then slowly, I put her back on the shelf. I looked away from her, back at the yarn on my bed. There it was again. Eyes. 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 What did I think at that moment? Did I really believe my little tiny crochet doll, the thing I had literally just watched myself create just the other day, was talking? No. I don't know if I believe it because it was insane or because I refused to. But either way, it was no coincidence that the whispering stopped the second I looked back at her again. And when I looked away, the whispers returned. I didn't have time to think about it. I grabbed the doll roughly, nearly ripping one of her little button eyes off, and stormed into the kitchen. I threw her on my counter. It was the furthest place in the apartment from my bedroom. If there really was a connection, which I prayed there wasn't, maybe it'd at least be quiet enough for me to get some sleep. And for a little while my theory proved right. Far away from me, she had quietened down. The whisper remained, but muffled through a locked door. It was hard to pay attention to it. But she wasn't going to stop. I need her. It was a lot easier to try and force myself to sleep with the whispers muffled like that. I closed my eyes and turned away from the door. I covered my ears with the pillow, and almost instantly, as all the sounds of the world became muffled, I passed out. I don't know if I was dreaming or if I really woke up that night, but I heard the little doll. She wasn't whispering anymore, she was screaming. She was demanding to be heard. Her eyes. I will have her eyes. Eyes, I need her. Where is she? She's bedroom. The next morning I had just about had it. I was tired, I was sleep deprived, I looked like a raving lunatic and felt like one too. She was going in the dumpster. I slammed open my bedroom door and went to the kitchen, grabbing her off the counter and shoving her into my purse. I wasn't about to be seen walking across my apartment complex all the way to the dumpster, holding a little pink doll. I didn't need to look any crazier than I already felt. I opened the door and froze. I was immediately greeted by something I wasn't ready for. A video camera pointed right at my front door. The neighbour across the way had set one up in his window and it was blinking, recording me. I didn't have the capacity to hold in the tiny screen that erupted out of me when I saw the camera. I slammed my front door hard and fell to the ground. Why was he recording my door? Was it legal for him to do that? Was it this old man's idea of having a Ring doorbell or something? What would he do now that he had footage of me? Scrolling through my phone on the floor, I called the apartment manager. No answer. I thought quickly about calling the police, but I didn't know exactly what I'd say. Hi, my neighbour has a video camera pointed outside, is that legal? Would I sound crazy? What if I got reprimanded for wasting a police officer's time? Quickly, I disregarded the idea and shot an email out to the apartment manager, asking what to do and telling them I needed to talk to them about it immediately. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel comfortable. There was a knock at my door. My heart stopped for a minute before I heard a voice. My next door neighbour. Hello, is everything okay over there? I heard a scream and a thud. Are you okay? It was a struggle to get myself off the floor, what with my legs shaking as badly as they were. I used the doorknob to force myself up before I opened it. There he was, my next door neighbour, staring at me with wide, shocked eyes when he saw the state I was in. I can't even imagine how I looked, hair unbrushed, eyes dead tired, dirty clothes in disarray. I heard him whisper a curse under his breath. I was still crying. I felt the tears pour down my face as I looked up at him. My neighbour. I forced myself to speak through my sobs. He's recording me. He set up... I pointed at the apartment across the way, not able to get out the rest. I watched my neighbour look back behind him, across to the old man's place as he cringed. What is the camera for? He asked in disbelief. I tried to contact the apartment's managers. They didn't... I sniffled and coughed out a few sobs. My neighbour looked down at me. He looked so sad at that moment, so full of pity. Hey, it's okay. They'll get back to you. They always take weird breaks. It's okay, don't cry. Look, come over to my apartment for a bit till they answer, okay? You don't want that freak recording you in your own home. I watched him jump and curse as a loud bang from the construction site startled us both. For the first time in days, it felt like everything might be okay. At least with someone else around, I may be able to keep calm. I didn't even say anything to him. I just nodded wearily and followed him out of the apartment. I locked the door behind me and glared at the old man's camera as I shuffled my purse further up my shoulder. My neighbour waited patiently for me, looking at me the whole time with that sad, pitying look. He ushered me into his apartment. Based on what I thought of him, his apartment was exactly as I pictured. He had always come off as the sort of frat boy partying type. The walls were littered with posters and furniture looked like it had never once been cleaned. There were beer cans and discarded food containers all over the place, and the entire living room had an off smell. But even with all that, the first thing I noticed was a pair of hot pink, lacy panties on the floor. He quickly lurched and picked them up, hiding them behind his back as his cheeks flushed red. Sorry, I had a girl over. He was trying to explain, but it looked like he couldn't get the words out. He laughed nervously. I laughed the same way. It felt kind of nice to see him flustered. I always felt like I was the awkward one. It was nice to be on the other end of the exchange. Besides, he didn't really need to explain anything to me. I definitely heard him with all those girls every night. I glanced down at my phone, hoping for a notification from an email, but there was nothing. My neighbour cleared his throat. So, do you want something to drink? I've got water, lemonade, soda. He motioned to the cans on the floor and chuckled. Plenty of beer too, if you're a morning drinker. I shook my head and tried to force a smile. Could I have some water, please? Yeah, sure, just let me, I didn't think I'd have anyone over. I haven't really washed dishes in a while, or ever. Let me clean a cup for you real quick. I watched him hurry into the kitchen, seemingly forgetting he was holding a pair of women's panties. He disappeared through the doorway around the corner, and All I heard was the sound of what seemed like a mountain of dishes and silverware avalanching down into his sink as he turned the faucet on. It wasn't ideal. None of this was. In the past 24 hours I had gone insane, been stalked, and now stood waiting for help in the apartment of a guy who seemingly had never heard of cleaning. The sounds of construction outside snapped me out of my own thoughts. I glanced down at my phone again, still nothing. Then whispers. God damn it, I thought, bitterly remembering the little crochet doll in my purse. I was going to throw her out. That's why I was out here in the first place. Beauty. Her eyes. God, yes, her eyes. No, I didn't want to hear it. I tried to listen to anything else, the construction, the traffic. I even tried to focus on the sound of my neighbour, struggling to pick up the dishes he dropped while his faucet kept running. But next came a voice. Not a whisper, but a very clear, very defined, very firm voice. The closet. I jumped. The voice had never been so loud and clear. The noises coming from outside and in the kitchen were still there, still loud as ever, but the voice had been so strong it sounded like someone speaking right to me. Nervously, I looked up, away from my phone. Just like in my apartment, there was a closet in the living room. His was next to the pizza box covered sofa. He had a sock hanging on the doorknob of the closet. I stared at it as if I was trying to stare through it. I felt myself walking towards it, quietly, trying not to make any noise. I heard my neighbour fumbling around, trying to find a bottle of dish soap. This was crazy, I thought. I was not about to look through this guy's personal belongings because a doll was talking to me. But I couldn't get the thought out of my head. I stopped right in front of the door and stared at it. The voice was replaying in my head, over and over, unendingly. It wouldn't stop. So I opened it. The closet was empty, save for one single open tote box that sat in the middle. It was filled to the brim, almost overflowing with women's panties of all different colours, sizes and fabrics. Some torn, some ripped, some covered in white and red stains, and strewn amongst the pile of women's underwear were eyes. Gouged out, mangled up, eyes absolutely coated in dried blood. I couldn't contain the gasp that was forced out of me at that moment, but luckily one of the construction trucks happened to grab something metal at that moment. It completely covered my sound. I couldn't take my gaze off the tote. I felt a flurry of bile force its way up out of my stomach that I had to physically hold back by covering my mouth. I swallowed painfully and kept my gaze on the pile of human eyeballs. I was completely and utterly frozen in fear. Everything seemed to vanish in that moment. Going absolutely silent, the world was completely devoid of all noise. Except there it was again, that clear voice. Run, Hannah. I turned quickly at another sound too. I heard the faucet turn off and heard the dry squeaking of a rag on a porcelain cup. Hey, did you want some ice with your water? My neighbour called out. I stared in the direction of the kitchen, too terrified to speak. Quickly, but as quietly as I can, I shut the closet door. I had to think fast. There was absolutely no time to falter. For the first time in days, I called my mother. "Oh," I called out into the living room as I listened for an answer on the other side. "The managers are calling me back." It only took a few seconds for my mum to answer. "Hello?" "Hi, Mrs. Jacobs," I exclaimed loudly, trying to disguise my nerves laced into my voice. "This is Hannah from Unit 513. Did you receive my email?" "What?" my mum responded. "Honey, I think you called the wrong number." "Oh, no, I didn't. Sorry. I know you're on a break, but it's urgent. I have a complaint about my neighbour. I feel really unsafe around him." It was at this moment my next-door neighbour stepped out of the kitchen, empty glass in hand, and stared at me. "Honey, what? Are you okay? What's going on? Do you need to call the police?" Yes, absolutely, Mrs. Jacobs. I'll come right down now. Thank you so much." I hung up the phone quickly to give my mum some time. I looked up at my neighbour, who was just staring at me. "Hey, they got back to me," I said, a little too fast. "Thank you for your help. I really appreciate it. They need me to go down and talk to them right now. Goodbye." I barely even got out the last few words as I hurried out the front door. I didn't give him any time to say anything in return. I just booked it. I went far. Not to my apartment, not to the manager's office, but all the way across the complex to my car. I locked myself in and lowered myself in the front seat. If anything were to happen, I could drive away as fast as I could. Luckily, the police were quick to arrive. They took my statement, but I couldn't tell how much they believed. I told them about the eyes. They gave me a weird look when I did. Truth be told, I'd hardly believe it myself, looking the way I did. I must have looked like a psychopath. They definitely treated me like one. I found out about a week later that the only reason they started the process of getting a warrant was actually due to my other neighbour's testimony. They tried to go next door, but suddenly and surprisingly that neighbour had completely left, vanished. He had taken a lot of his things and left his apartment behind. The old man across the way was the one standing out there, waiting for the cops. He showed them footage he had taken with his camera. He went on raving to the police about how he saw many girls enter that apartment and never leave. Then he would catch my next-door neighbour go to my window at night and stare inside. He had video evidence to back up everything he said, all from that one night. But even with the warrant processing, they still had no idea where the guy was to even start with. As for myself, I've decided to stay at my mum's house indefinitely. I'm in the process of breaking my lease, which would go a lot faster if the police could actually search my neighbour's apartment to back up my claims. Though I still don't know if they'll find anything. Without the full testimony from the old man, I don't think they'd even look twice at my claim. So I guess I'm grateful. After the ordeal with the police, I started my car back up and set my purse down on the passenger floor. But inside, I grabbed the little crochet doll and sat her up on my passenger seat. At the sight of her little uneven smile, I smiled back despite everything. It was nice to know someone was looking out for me. It would be nice knowing someone else would listen out for things I had gone deaf to. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed this video, please remember to subscribe to the channel and like the video, as it helps more people to find it. Join me for live streams on TikTok several times a week. You can find my profile in the description, or just search Bad Dream Baby. And if you'd like even more content, consider subscribing to my Patreon account, linked in the description. Until next time, good night.